Hello everyone. You are listening to this audiobook on channel Voice of Purpose by NSS IT Bombay.
Chapter 2, Part 2. Bridget Royce remained as if in a trance, staring at the sunlit garden in which a man had just vanished like a fairy. She was still in a sinister mood, and the miracle took in her mind a character of unfriendliness and fear, as if the fairy were decidedly a bad fairy. The sun upon the glittering garden depressed her more than the darkness, but she continued to stare at it. Then the world itself went half-witted and she screamed. The scarecrow moved in the sunlight. It had stood with its back to her in a battered old black hat and tattered garment, and with all its tatters flying, it strode away across the hill. She did not analyze the audacious trick by which the man had turned to his advantage and the subtle effects of the expected and the obvious. She was still under the cloud of more individual complexities, and she noticed most of all that the vanishing scarecrow did not even turn to look at the farm. And the fates that were running so adverse to his fantastic career of freedom ruled that his next adventure, though it had the same success in another quarter, should increase the danger in this quarter. Among the many similar adventures related of him in this manner, it is also said that some days afterward another girl named Mary Cregan found him concealed on the farm where she worked, and if the story is true, she must also have had the shock of an uncanny experience. For when she was busy at some lonely task in the yard, she heard a voice speaking out of the well, and found that the eccentric had managed to drop himself into the bucket which was some little way below, the well only partly full of water. In this case, however, he had to appeal to the woman to wind up the rope, and men say it was when this news was told to the other woman that her soul walked over the borderline of treason. Such at least were the stories told of him in the countryside, and there were many more, as that he had stood insolently in a splendid green dressing gown on the steps of a great hotel, and then led the police a chase through a long suite of grand apartments, and finally through his own bedroom onto a balcony that overhung the river. The moment the pursuers stepped onto the balcony, it broke under them, and they dropped pell-mell into the eddying waters, while Michael, who had thrown off his gown and dived, was able to swim away. It was said that he had carefully cut away the props so that would not support anything so heavy as a policeman. But here again he was immediately fortunate, yet ultimately unfortunate, for it is said that one of the men was drowned, leaving a family feud which made a little rift in his popularity. These stories can now be told in some detail, not because they were the most marvelous of his many adventures, but because these only were not covered with silence by the loyalty of the peasantry. These alone found their way into official reports, and it is these which three of the chief officials of the country were reading and discussing when the most remarkable part of the story begins. Night was far advanced, and the lights shone in the cottage that served for a temporary police station near the coast. On one side of it were the last houses of a straggling village, and on the other nothing but a vast moorland stretching away toward the sea, the line of which was broken by no landmark except a solitary tower of the prehistoric pattern still found in Ireland, standing up as slender as a column, but pointed like a pyramid. At a wooden table in front of the window, which normally looked out on this landscape, sat two men in plain clothes, but with something of a military bearing, for indeed they were the two chiefs of the detective service of that district. The senior of the two, both in age and rank, was a sturdy man with a short white beard and the frosty eyebrows fixed in a frown which suggested rather worry than severity. His name was Morton, and he was a Liverpool man long pickled in the Irish quarrels, and doing his duty among them in a sour fashion not altogether unsympathetic. He had spoken a few sentences to his companion, Nolan, a tall, dark man with a cadaverous equine Irish face, and he seemed to remember something and touched a bell which rang in another room. The subordinate he had summoned immediately appeared with a sheaf of papers in his hand. "Sit down, Wilson," he said. "Those are the depositions, I suppose." "Yes," replied the third officer. I think I've got all there is to be got out of them, so I sent the police away. Did Mary Cregan give evidence? Asked Morton, with a frown that looked a little heavier than usual. No, but her master did, answered the man called Wilson, who had flat, red hair and a plain, pale face, not without sharpness. I think he's hanging around the girl himself and is out against a rival. There's always some reason of that sort when we are told the truth about anything. And you bet the other girl told right enough. Well, let's hope there'll be some sort of use, remarked Nolan in a somewhat hopeless manner, gazing out into the darkness. Anything is to the good, said Morton. That lets us know anything about him. Do we know anything about him? Asked the melancholy Irishman. We know one thing about him, said Wilson, and it's the one thing that nobody ever knew before. We know where he is. Are you sure? Inquired Morton, looking at him sharply. Quite sure, replied his assistant. At this very minute, he is in that tower over there by the shore. If you go near enough, you'll see the candle burning in the window. As he spoke, the noise of a horn sounded on the road outside, and a moment after they heard the throbbing of a motor car brought to a standstill before the door. Morton instantly sprang to his feet. Thank the Lord, that's the car from Dublin, he said. I can't do anything without special authority. Not if he was sitting on top of the tower and putting out his tongue at us. The chief can do what he thinks best. He hurried out to the entrance and was soon exchanging greetings with a big, handsome man in a fur coat, who brought into the dingy little station the indescribable glow of the great cities and the luxuries of the great world. But this was Sir Walter Carey, an official of such eminence in Dublin Castle that nothing short of the case of Prince Michael would have brought him on such a journey in the middle of the night. The case of Prince Michael, as it happened, was complicated by legalism as well as lawlessness. On the last occasion, he had escaped by a forensic quibble and not, as usual, by a private escapade, and it was a question whether at the moment he was amenable to the law or not. It might be necessary to stretch a point, but a man like Sir Walter would probably stretch it as far as he liked. Whether he intended to do so was a question to be considered. Despite the almost aggressive touch of luxury in the fur coat, it soon became apparent that Sir Walter's large leonine head was for use as well as ornament, and he considered the matter soberly and sanely enough. 5 chairs were set around the plain deal table, but who should Sir Walter bring with him but his young relative and secretary, Horne Fisher? Sir Walter listened with grave attention, and his secretary with polite boredom, to the string of episodes by which the police had traced the flying rebel from the steps of the hotel to the solitary tower beside the sea. That at least he was cornered between the Moors and the breakers, and the scout sent by Wilson reporting him as writing under a solitary candle, perhaps composing another of his tremendous proclamations. Indeed, it would have been typical of him to choose it as the place in which finally to turn to bay. He had some remote claim on it, as on a family castle, and those who knew him thought him capable of imitating the private Irish chieftains who fell fighting against the sea. I saw some queer-looking people leaving as I came in, said Sir Walter Carey. I suppose they were your witnesses, but why do they turn up here at this time of night? Morton smiled grimly. They came here by night because they would be dead men if they came here by day. They are criminals committing a crime that is more horrible here than theft or murder. What crime do you mean? Asked the other with some curiosity. They are helping the law, said Morton. There was a silence, and Sir Walter considered the papers before him with an abstracted eye. At last he spoke. Quite so, but look here, if the local feeling is as lively as that there are a good many points to consider, I believe the new act will enable me to collar him now if I think it best. But is it best? A serious rising would do us no good in Parliament, and the government has enemies in England as well as Ireland. It won't do if I have done what looks a little like sharp practice and then only raised a revolution. It's all the other way, said the name Wilson rather quickly. There won't be half so much of a revolution if you arrest him as there will if you leave him loose for 3 days longer. But anyhow, there can't be anything nowadays that the proper police can't manage. Mr. Wilson is a Londoner, said the Irish detective with a smile. Yes, I'm a Cockney, all right, replied Wilson, and I think I'm all the better for that, especially at this job, oddly enough. Sir Walter seemed slightly amused at the pertinacity of the third officer, and perhaps even more assumed at the slight accent with which he spoke, which rendered rather needless his boast about his origin. Do you mean to say, he asked, that you know more about the business here because you have come from London? Sounds funny, I know, but I do believe it, answered Wilson. I believe these affairs want fresh methods, but most of all I believe they want a fresh eye. The superior officers laughed, and the red-headed man went on with a slight touch of temper. Well, look at the facts, see how the fellow got away every time, and you'll understand what I mean. Why was he able to stand in the place of the scarecrow, hidden by nothing but an old hat? Because it was a village policeman who knew the scarecrow was there, was expecting it, and therefore took no notice of it. Now I never expect a scarecrow. I've never seen one in the street, and I stare at one when I see it in the field. It's a new thing to me, and worth noticing, and it was just the same when he hid in the well. You are ready to find a well in a place like that. You look for a well, and so you don't see it. I don't look for it, and therefore I do look at it. It is certainly an idea, said Sir Walter, smiling. But what about the balcony? Balconies are occasionally seen in London, but not rivers right under them, as if it was in Venice, replied Wilson. It is certainly a new idea, repeated Sir Walter with something like respect. He had all the love of the luxurious classes for new ideas, but he also had a critical faculty and was inclined to think, after due reflection, that it was a true idea as well.
So hope you guys had fun. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel for more interesting audiobooks.